Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at the war in Iraq. We're going to watch this short video which will go over it.
It has been called the most unpopular war in America since Vietnam.
They died in a just cause for defending freedom, and they will not have died in vain.
Welcome to WatchMojo.com, and today we'll be learning more about the Iraq War. While the war in Iraq officially began in March 2003, it was decades in the making. After the Gulf War ended in 1991, the United Nations imposed sanctions that prevented Iraq from building or housing weapons of mass destruction. The United States and its allies also pressured Iraq to remove Saddam Hussein as leader. Despite these limitations, Iraq was accused of having access to a number of destructive items, including biological weapons, poison gas, and more. Following 9/11, President George W. Bush and his administration attempted disarmament efforts with renewed gusto.
Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts.
Meanwhile, Iraq did not fully cooperate with UN weapons inspections. By 2002, Bush warned that Iraq would face military action should they not allow these security checks. In October 2002, the joint resolution to authorize the use of United States armed forces against Iraq was approved by the U.S. Senate, allowing Bush to legally invade Iraq as part of his war on terror.
When I say we will lead a coalition of the willing to disarm him if he chooses not to disarm, I mean it.
The U.S. also claimed an interest in installing a democratic regime in Iraq. However, fellow NATO members France, Germany, and Canada, in addition to Russia, were all against an invasion of Iraq, and instead wanted to disarm the country through diplomatic negotiations. Meanwhile, the U.S. and Tony Blair's United Kingdom pushed ahead with their plans. On March 20, 2003, Operation Iraqi Freedom began. Almost 250,000 American soldiers fought beside 45,000 British soldiers and more troops from a variety of other nations. With this invasion, the US and UK hoped to end the Hussein regime, eliminate WMDs, remove radical Islamists, and give humanitarian aid wherever possible. They also hoped to take control of Iraqi oil and to install a model democratic government. On April 9th, the US-led coalition took the city of Baghdad, and this signaled the end of Saddam Hussein's reign. A transitional government was then put into place. The Coalition Provisional Authority stayed in office until mid-2004 and held power over the government of Iraq. By May 2003, Bush considered the war a mission accomplished and declared victory despite the fact Saddam Hussein had not yet been captured.
Major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
Insurgent and guerrilla attacks increased following that speech and caused a number of U.S. military deaths. Efforts were then increased to catch former government leaders. Saddam Hussein's sons were killed, and many important people were captured. Saddam himself was finally taken at the end of 2003, and this signaled an improvement in conditions as insurgent attacks briefly decreased. Unfortunately, by the spring of 2004, not only did insurgency resume, it also intensified.
The main reason we went into Iraq at the time was we thought he had weapons of mass destruction, capacity to make weapons of mass destruction. But I also talked about the human suffering in Iraq.
Violent battles, like the first and second battles of Fallujah, resulted in civilian, police, and U.S. military deaths. Fighting, insurgency, IEDs, and suicide bombings continued over the next years. After a general election at the end of 2005, Iraq's permanent government took control in May 2006. Shortly thereafter, the leader of al-Qaeda in Iraq was located and killed. At the end of 2006, amid reports that suggested the situation in Iraq was not progressing, Saddam Hussein's death sentence was carried out after he was found guilty of crimes against humanity. By 2007, the U.S. began employing a surge strategy and deployed more troops. Meanwhile, allies began withdrawing their forces. The next year, things stabilized and fatalities dropped significantly. 2008 also saw the approval of the U.S.-Iraq Status of Forces Agreement. Most importantly, this deal meant American troops would be removed from Iraq by the end of 2011. An exit strategy was presented in 2009, and in October 2011, President Barack Obama pledged the American presence would end as promised.
As of January 1st, and in keeping with our strategic framework agreement with Iraq, it will be a normal relationship between sovereign nations, an equal partnership based on mutual interests and mutual respect.
Meanwhile, the restrictions placed on Iraq in the 1990s were lifted by the UN, and this gave the Iraqi government control of the country's oil. Since it began, the Iraq War cost American taxpayers trillions of dollars and took countless soldier and civilian lives. It ultimately became one of the longest and most divisive battles in U.S. history.
So, question. What role did weapons of mass destruction play in the U.S. invasion of Iraq? So what we're talking about here is how did weapons of mass destruction, which usually means nuclear weapons, how did they change what the U.S. did when the U.S. decided to go in and invade Iraq? Did they A, lead the U.S. to invade, but none were found? Or B, it led the U.S. to invade, but many were found? So A is saying the U.S. went into Iraq because there were supposed to be all these nuclear weapons, but we didn't find any. And B is like, the U.S. went into Iraq, but we found tons and tons of nuclear weapons. So which one is it? Okay, now we are going to be talking and looking at President Obama's presidency. So we're going to watch a short biography of his.
Because of what we did on this day, in this election, at this defining moment, change has come to America.
Barack Hussein Obama Jr., the 44th President of the United States of America, was born in Honolulu, Hawaii on August 4, 1961. By the time Obama was 2, his parents had separated. In 1966, his mother Ann Dunham remarried, and the family moved to Jakarta, Indonesia.
He was a mixed-race kid, but in Hawaii, this was not unusual, and he wasn't out of place in Indonesia.
At 10 years old, Obama moved back to Hawaii to live with his grandparents. He graduated from Columbia University in 1983. He moved to Chicago, becoming a community organizer for low-income residents on the South Side.
It was a good way for him to study power and how to use it and how to get it.
Obama was admitted to Harvard Law School in 1988. The following summer, during an internship at a Chicago law firm, he met Michelle Robinson.
She was in charge of mentoring him, and he was immediately smitten and started asking her out for dates.
In law school, Obama was the first African-American president of the Harvard Law Review. After graduation, he returned to Chicago to practice civil rights law, teach law school, and organize Get Out the Vote campaigns. Obama and Michelle married in 1992 and then had 2 daughters, Malia and Sasha.
And it was during that period where he decided that to do what he wanted to do in life in terms of changing the world, he had to go into elective politics.
In 1996, Obama won a seat in the Republican-controlled Illinois State Senate.
Republicans remember him as a great pragmatist in the state legislature, a guy that they could work with.
In 2000, Obama suffered his only political loss in a run for the U.S. House of Representatives. But in 2004, he ran for the U.S. Senate and gave a high-profile speech at the Democratic National Convention.
People sat up in their chairs and said, where did he come from? People loved his message. His message was, we're not red states and blue states, we're purple.
At that moment, people thought of Barack Obama as a presidential candidate in waiting.
18 months ago, y'all didn't know who I was.
Obama won his Senate race by a large margin. In 2007, the freshman senator announced he was running for President of the United States. His main opponent in the Democratic primaries was Hillary Clinton. He won the nomination.
The choice in this election is not between regions or religions or genders. It is about the past versus the future.
In 2008, he won the general election, defeating Republican candidate John McCain.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
On January 20th, 2009, Obama was sworn in as the 44th President of the United States. 10 months later, he won the Nobel Peace Prize.
He did, in his remarks, point out that there are justifiable uses of force, and he would not shrink from using them.
The 30,000 additional troops that I'm announcing tonight will deploy in the first part of 2010.
While dealing with the consequences of inheriting 2 wars and attempting to develop a strategy for bringing them to an end, Obama and the U.S. military were able to track down and kill Osama bin Laden. Obama also pushed through several major policies during his first term in office, including helping repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
He passed, health care with no Republican support, the big stimulus bill with no Republican support, but 2 women on the Supreme Court.
Obama also began his presidency in the midst of the worst economic crisis that America has faced since the Great Depression. Despite bailouts for the auto and banking industries, the financial crisis on Wall Street led to record housing foreclosures. The national debt passed $16 trillion. Unemployment also remained high during his first term in office.
The hole the recession left was huge, and progress has been painfully slow.
Republicans nominated former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney to run against Obama in the 2012 presidential election.
Real, achievable plans that will lead to new jobs, more opportunity, and rebuild this economy on a stronger foundation. That's what we can do in the next 4 years, and that is why I am running for a second term as President of the United States.
Bit of background on Barack Obama gives you a little bit of information about his first term as president. As President Obama goes through his second term as president, what we will see is the United States coming out of the Great Recession. We will see unemployment drop. We will see the housing industry recover, and the United States begin to go on an economic upswing. Through President Obama's presidency, we are going to see a lot of bills passed. We're going to see national healthcare reform. We are also going to see in Obama's presidency, the first African-American multiracial president, which was a landmark or a really important thing. It really showed the progress the United States was making in equality. And that will end our session today. We have a couple of questions. First, what was the importance of Barack Obama's victory in the 2008 presidential election? Was it A, he didn't win the popular vote, or B, he was the first African-American president? Next question, what was one of the main social reforms under President Obama? A, the Family and Medical Leave Act, or B, health care? We're at the end. You've completed all of the units in the second part of U.S. history. Take a moment and celebrate. Congratulations.